Read 20 more books, and these are the ones worth reading. Now, I was quite overwhelmed by the thoughts of ranking 20 books, so I did what any sane person would do, and I created a tier list. So at the bottom we have the 20 books I read in the past 3-4 months, and I think the tiers are quite self-explanatory. But obviously on top we have Mind Blown. These are only for some of the best books I've ever read, and at the bottom we have Nope. So without further ado, let's rank these, and in no particular order. Okay, Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. So we actually read this book for the Viking book club, which is the book club I have on my Patreon. Now, I was so excited when this book was randomly chosen, because I have been wanting to check Octavia Butler's work for ages. Now, this was one of those books that I actually didn't enjoy that much reading, but after I finished it, I started appreciating it more and more and more, and this book has literally stayed with me for months. So yeah, it's just extremely bleak, but I think just for that emotional impact and for how thought-provoking it is, I must put it in really, really good. If you'd asked me right when I finished the book, I probably would have put it in worth reading, but yeah, it's just one of those really thought-provoking books that I ended up really enjoying. Next up we have Edgedancer by Brando Sando. Okay, so obviously I'm a huge Sanderson fan, but honestly, I think that this might be my least favorite story I have read by him. I didn't get invested in any of the characters, and I didn't enjoy the plot, and I'm so glad that this was a short novel or novella, because yeah, I just couldn't wait to get it over with. It feels horrible because I love Sanderson, but I have to put this in Nope. Okay, I'm gonna sound like a hate here. Next we have A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and I'm just going to be brief here. If you enjoy humor and some slice of life elements, then you'll probably love this book, but man, I did not enjoy almost a single page, and this book is like 400 pages, and I knew 100 pages in that this wasn't for me, and for some stupid reason I kept pushing myself to finish it. I really should just have abandoned it straight away, but since I forced myself to continuously read to the end, it just ended up being a horrible reading experience. Unfortunately, this goes at the bottom of Nope for now. Artemis by Andy Weir. Obviously, Project Hail Mary and The Martians are some of my favorite sci-fi books of all time, and I had to check Artemis out. Now, I had heard from a lot of people that this novel was underwhelming compared to the other books he's written, and I do agree with that one. I will still say that this isn't a badly written book, and if you're a big Andy Weir fan, I still think there are some elements here that you will probably end up enjoying, but for me personally, it was not very memorable. Yeah, I think it has to go into meh. Alright, and then we have Demon by Rob J. Hayes. So this is just a short novella, and man, I loved this short novella, but I think this honestly might be some of the darkest literature I have ever read. I mean, eating your friends kind of dark. It is just ridiculously grim, and I'm so glad that this novella was short, because I probably couldn't stomach one more page if it was any longer. But what I will say is that the story itself was absolutely riveting. I might have some morbid curiosity here, but my real thought is, what's going on in Rob J. Hayes' mind? Because this novella was just... I can't even go into details because I'll just get demonetized. But for me, this was really good. I won't put it in Mind Blown, because maybe some of the elements didn't need to be described in that much detail. But yeah, I'll put it at the bottom of really good for now. Until the last book in the Last Word trilogy by Mike Shackle. So this was a brilliant conclusion to a really great modern grimdark epic fantasy. The way I would describe the series is kind of like reading John Gwynne, but more grim. Hey, that rhymes. Gwyn, grim. Gwyn, grim. Okay. I really enjoyed the conclusion. I thought the conclusion was very satisfying. I do think it is the weakest book in the trilogy, but it's definitely not a bad book by any means. So yeah, if you enjoy grimdark, modern fantasy, check out the series, and yeah, I'll put it at the bottom of really good, I think. Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. I've literally had this book on my TBR for years, and I finally read it this summer, and I loved it. Now, I will say that I did love the first half a bit more than the second half, where there's just a lot of action, stuff like that. I just thought the overall plot and the discussions of chaos theory and just exploration of concept and risk and stuff was just super fascinating. And then when everything hits the fan, it's just a lot of like survival, chaos, action kind of story, which was still enjoyable. But my favorite parts were definitely, you know, all those discussions about science and stuff. But really enjoyable. I definitely understand why this has become a classic. And even if you're not a big fan of sci-fi, I feel that this is a very accessible sci-fi book, because yes, there is some science, but you can very much just skim read it. Now, where do I rank it? I will probably, I mean, it doesn't doesn't go to Mind Blown even though I loved it. I'll probably put it right beneath Octavia Butler's book. Then we have True Grit by Charles Portis. So this was one of the novels that Scott Lynch recommended in that video where I got loads of famous authors to recommend me a book. And this was my first Western, or at least I do believe it was my very first Western. Now weirdly enough, when I was reading this novel, I didn't really enjoy the reading experience that much, but after I finished it, it again lingered in my mind for weeks actually. And obviously this novel has had 2 adaptations that have been very successful, and it's just an icon in the genre. If I just think about my enjoyment reading the novel, then it probably has to go to worth reading. Oh, or does it go to the bottom of really good? I don't know. I think if you enjoy Westerns, this probably will be one of the like best favorite books of yours. But for me personally, I'll probably put on worth reading because I'm really glad I read it. And I do want to check out some other Westerns. So if you have any recommendations, definitely let me know. The Shadow of Almost Lost, the first book in the Licanius trilogy. So we also read this one for the Viking Book Club. And I was so glad when this novel was randomly chosen because this series, it has literally been on my TBR for years and years and years. And I really want to read The Will of the Many, but I kind of made a deal with myself that I am not allowed to pick that one up until I have finished the Licanius trilogy. Now, as you can see at the bottom here, I have read the first 2 books and I'm hoping to read the third one very, very soon. Now, I really enjoyed the first book. It was a bit of a slow start, but when I really started getting into it, I loved it. And for some reason, I didn't expect this novel to feel so classic. For some reason, I expected like some really weird, strange world building and stuff like that, but it felt very, very reminiscent of The Wheel of Time is the obvious one. Definitely quite a good novel. I would probably put it at the bottom of... I'll put it slightly higher here. Let's just do book number 2. So An Echo of Things to Come. Unfortunately, while I did enjoy it, it also did leave a bit of a bad taste in my mouth because I just found it to be a bit too complicated for no good reason. James Allington loves to play with different timelines and stuff, and he doesn't really explain who a lot of these characters are. And unfortunately, a big part of this series is confusion, especially in book 2 where the complexity definitely increases. And for me, there was just a bit too much confusion that I just didn't end up caring as much about the characters and the stakes and stuff. Still not a bad book, but I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as book 1. Now a lot of people say the third book is the best by far, but I'm already now worried that I won't really remember all the details from book 2 because there are so many things going on. But for now, I'll put it at the bottom of worth reading. The Captain by Will Wide. So I have read 2 books in the Cradle series, and this was also a book that we read for the Viking Book Club. So the way the Viking Book Club works is that if you're in tier 3 or 4, you can put books forward, and then I randomly choose one book to read a month, and then I read it with my patrons, and then once a month we meet on Zoom and discuss the book. And this was a book that I had no plans to read, and it was randomly chosen, and initially the first 100 pages I kinda enjoyed, and the only reason I think that was is because I had just finished Demon, literally the darkest story I had read in my whole life, and then this book is just absolutely comical, absurd, so weird. And yeah, the only way I can really describe this whole story is that it's just a massive joke about wizards in space or something. So yeah, the first 100 pages, I was kind of digging it, but then I started almost hating it. Okay, let's just be honest, I actually hated the novel. I probably gave it like 2 stars, only because I kind of enjoyed the start. Yeah, not for me, I don't know. I read 3 books by Will White now, I have struggled with all of them. I hate giving up on authors, but he kind of feels like an author that is probably just not for me. And yeah, without a doubt, this must be the worst book I read out of the 20, so this goes at the very bottom of note. Not Chill by Ian McEwan. So I read this for the Wife Chooses My Reads for a Week reading log. I love this novel. It's basically about a fetus that observes what's going on inside the fetus and also outside, and it is just such an absurdist and ludicrous premise, but Ian McEwan is just such a talented author that I just felt so immersed in the story. Now technically this isn't fantasy, but this fetus has literally like a higher IQ than a lot of the adults that we encountered in this novel, so you could argue it has some fantastical elements. Yeah, I love this novel. Probably wouldn't put it in Mind Blown though, but it definitely is one of the better books I've read in recent times. I'll probably put it right above Jurassic Park, I think. Into the Wild by John Krakauer. Now some of you might have watched the movie, which is a movie I love, but this book is basically a non-fiction that does explore a bit about this person on the cover here that goes into the wild to try to find themselves. But then there's loads of like anecdotes about other people that have had a similar longing or a similar search for something deeper, and yeah, I loved this non-fiction book. It really made me think, it really made me feel for all these people that are looking for answers to life in different places in the wilderness and stuff like that. It's only a 200-page book, and I would definitely recommend it. I think just for the emotional impact, I'll probably put it at Mind Blown. I don't know, man. I think I will for now put it at top of Mind Blown just because how much I enjoyed it. The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. Now, I haven't read any of the Expanse, which are definitely the books that these authors are the most famous for, but I loved love the concept. So if you want to know my full thoughts, I'll put a link up here where I actually read this book. But I found the concept here in this novel to be incredibly refreshing. It's kind of like a futuristic Hunger Games with other aliens and stuff. I mean, the basic premise here is that humans like 5,000 years ago left Earth and settled on a different planet, and now we're following humans that have actually forgotten where they came from. So they now live on a different planet and they have forgotten their origins, and then some aliens come and they basically trap the brightest humans and tell them to be useful. And if they're not useful, they basically get killed. So it's kind of like a Hunger Games kind of esque setting. I just found the concept to be so riveting. Now, my biggest criticism is that the humans in this novel feel very similar to the humans in 2024 in the Western world, which if you think about it, that doesn't really make any sense. But if you can kind of take that out of your mind, then I think you'll have a great time with this one. So yeah, I definitely think this was a very good novel, and yeah, it probably goes right beneath Jurassic Park. The Star King by Jack Vance. So this was the book that George R.R. Martin recommended, and yeah, I did not enjoy this novel at all. So this is like pulp science fiction from the 60s. It's very short, and I definitely think that the fact that this novel was so short kind of forced the author to just make the characters extremely flat, because in my opinion, none of the characters have any emotional depth. They just feel like archetypes. And then almost every single chapter has like a page or two of just info dumps. And the plot is extremely hard to follow, at least in my opinion. I literally went online and googled if I had started with the wrong book because I was that confused. So yeah, this is definitely one of my least favorite books. It's definitely not as bad as The Captain or The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but yeah, I'll put it here for now. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. So this was also one of the novels that my wife recommended. Again, definitely not fantasy, but I loved it. So it's basically a biography about Jeanette McCurdy, who was like a Nickelodeon star, and her life was just insane. And the primary focus of this novel is her controlling mom and the emotional and psychological impact it had on Jeanette McCurdy to be raised in a household where the mom was basically a psychopath, in my opinion. Very riveting. When I read this novel, I just didn't want it to end at all. I'm calling it a novel, but it's actually a biography. So yeah, definitely one of my favorite books of the year, and yeah, I'll probably put it above Into the Wild. Very interesting that two of my favorite books of the past 20 so far have not been fantasy or sci-fi. The Passion According to G.H. So this was a novel my wife also recommended. So this is a Portuguese classic, I believe. It might be Brazilian, but I think it's Portuguese. Written in the 60s or 70s, and it's based about this woman that kills a cockroach, and then she just stares at this cockroach for like 120 pages, and we just hear her thoughts about God, culture, society, and it's just a very strange novel. Now, I'm not surprised that my wife, who literally has a master's in English literature, kind of enjoyed this novel because it's very beautifully written and has a very unique concept. But for me, yeah, it was interesting, but not very enjoyable. I do still think it was worth reading. I'm glad I read it, and again, as I said, it was quite short. So yeah, I think I'll just put it at the bottom of worth reading. Mythago Wood by Robert Holstock. So I recently read this one. I read it in the Asking Famous Author to recommend me a book, and then reading it. I think that was the title of the video. And I ended up loving this novel, and after I finished it, it has stayed with me, which has really cemented how enjoyable this novel was. I think Robert Holstock is just incredible at writing atmosphere. I think like mysterious, haunted, weird forest is such an underutilized setting in fantasy, and this whole story takes place in a weird, mysterious forest. The world building is seriously strange, the characters are interesting. This novel feels very dreamlike, but so different from anything else I read. I'm so glad I read this one, and yeah, this one probably goes at the top of really good. Two more books to go. The Little Prince. Oh, I absolutely adored this novel, and I didn't expect that. This is literally a children's book. It's 80 pages, but there's loads of illustrations. You can read this book in less than an hour, and it will fill you with wonder. It will activate that kind of imagination you had as a child. The story is seriously weird, where this guy just jumps from planets to planets, but this novel just made me feel like a child again. It's absolutely magical. Loved it. You all should read it. Definitely goes at the top of Mind Blown. And lastly, the fourth and last book in the Ravenloft Chronicles by Robin Hobb. So I have spent around 3 months reading this book, which is obviously not a good sign. So yeah, I spent around 3 months just reading the first half, and I just struggled. Oh man, I struggled. And obviously there were periods over these past 3 months where I didn't read it for weeks, and I came back to it, or just a couple pages, and I abandoned it. But now, very recently, I decided I had to get to the end of this novel. I picked it up, and I was like, I'm gonna read it now. And I read like the last 250 pages in 1 or 2 days. And actually, when I did that, I started enjoying the story quite a bit. So I don't know, overall the Ravenloft Chronicles has been a disappointment, especially compared to the other series in this universe. But the last half of this novel, I actually ended up enjoying. Now, I wouldn't say it was amazing by any means, but if you had asked me a week ago before I picked it up again, I probably would have put it at the bottom of Nope almost. But it actually ended up being, yeah, worth reading. Now, if you want to watch me read books that famous authors have recommended, check out this video. Oh, you're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that I have a Viking book club on my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, then you get access to an exclusive book club where every single month we read one book together and the book can be put forward by you. If you join tier 3 or 4, then you can put a book forward and then I randomly choose a book from the pot that we end up reading together, and throughout the month we discuss the book on the Patreon chats, and then we also have Zoom hangouts, which honestly are some of my favorite times of the month. This month we're reading this book and next month we're gonna be reading this book. Also, since I launched my Patreon, I basically spent my money back into the channel on video editing. I've had more than 40 videos professionally edited, so if you want to support what I do here and also help me upload more consistently, then I'll leave a link in the description down below.